Montana Territory, 1876. Abigail Morgan stood at the bedroom window watching snowflakes dance in the evening air. From this third-floor perch of the Walsh mansion, she could see all of Pinewood Creek spread below the church steeple, piercing the twilight sky, miners trudging home along muddy streets, lamps flickering to life in modest cabins. So much life contained in that small space, yet she had never felt more removed from it. 6 years since she'd arrived as Harrison Walsh's bride, full of hope that the handsome, successful mine owner would give her the stability she'd craved since the war. 6 years of learning day by painful day that the charming man who had courted her in St. Louis was a facade. Behind closed doors lived a different creature entirely, one who measured his worth by his ability to control everything and everyone around him. Abby traced the fading yellow bruise along her collarbone, hidden beneath her high-necked dress. Harrison had been displeased with her charity work at the church last week. Apparently, Mrs. Walsh spending time with miners' wives reflected poorly on his status. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Walsh is asking for you in the study." Mary, their housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her young face carefully blank. But Abby caught the slight tightening around her eyes a warning. "Thank you, Mary. I'll be down shortly." When the door closed, Abby pressed a hand to her abdomen, still flat, though the nausea each morning told a different story. 2 months along now, a child, Harrison's child. The thought should have brought joy, but instead ice formed in her veins. Harrison had made his feelings about children abundantly clear during their marriage. Messy, demanding creatures, he'd said once watching a miner's family in town. Better suited to people with less important concerns than mine. What would he do when he discovered her condition? The question haunted her as she made her way downstairs, each step measured and silent. Harrison's study smelled of leather tobacco and the particular cologne he imported from New York. He sat behind his massive oak desk reviewing ledgers while his brother Vincent lounged in a nearby chair, glass of whiskey in hand. The two Walsh brothers were a study in contrasts. Where Harrison was broad-shouldered and imposing with a carefully maintained beard, Vincent was slender, clean-shaven, with sharp features that reminded Abby of a fox. Harrison's violence came in explosive bursts. Vincent's cruelty, she had learned, was calculated and cold. "Ah, there she is," Vincent said, raising his glass slightly. "The dutiful wife." Harrison didn't look up immediately. "Sit down, Abigail." She perched on the edge of a leather chair, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Dr. Thompson mentioned seeing you at his office yesterday," Harrison said, finally closing his ledger. "You didn't tell me you were unwell." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. In the Walsh household, Abby's health, like everything else about her, was considered Harrison's property. "It was just a passing dizzy spell," she replied softly. "I didn't want to trouble you with trifles." Vincent chuckled. "Women and their delicate constitutions." Harrison studied her face, and Abby forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. If he discovered her pregnancy now before she had a plan— "You seem distracted lately," Harrison said. "Forgetful. Dr. Thompson suggested you might be suffering from nervous exhaustion." Cold dread washed over her. She recognized this strategy from whispered conversations among the women of Pinewood Creek. Mrs. Cooper's melancholia before she vanished. Mrs. Blackwood's first wife's nervous condition before her sudden death. "I feel quite well, Harrison, perhaps a bit tired from the changing season." "Nevertheless," Harrison continued, "I've decided you should rest more. No more charity work. No more afternoon teas with the ladies from church." "Harrison, please." "This isn't a negotiation, Abigail." His tone remained even reasonable, the voice he used in town council meetings. "I'm concerned for your well-being. As your husband, it's my duty to protect you, even from yourself." Vincent smirked behind his whiskey glass. "Such a caring brother you are." Harrison ignored him. "Mary will bring your meals upstairs. Dr. Thompson will visit weekly to monitor your condition. I've already cleared my calendar for dinner with Judge Blackwood. Tonight, no need for you to strain yourself." Imprisonment. That's what he was describing, disguised as concern. "I have responsibilities at the church charity," she attempted. "The winter clothing drive for the mining families is no longer your concern," Harrison cut in, his voice hardening slightly. "I've already informed Reverend Wright that your health requires complete rest." The walls seemed to close in around her. This was how it began for the others, restriction, isolation then. "You look pale, Abigail," Vincent observed with mock concern. "Perhaps Harrison is right about your delicate condition." She forced herself to breathe normally. May I at least walk in the garden for fresh air? Harrison considered this, then nodded magnanimously. Of course, with Mary as accompaniment. We wouldn't want you to fall ill alone. In other words, with a watchful eye ensuring she didn't stray beyond the property's wrought iron fence. Thank you for your concern, she managed. Harrison returned to his ledger, a clear dismissal. As she rose to leave, Vincent caught her arm. Such a shame about Julia, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. Harrison's first wife suffered from similar nervous spells. Didn't she, brother? Harrison's pen paused briefly. Julia died of fever 5 years ago. There's no comparison. Of course, Vincent smiled. My mistake. The exchange chilled Abby to her core. As she left the study, Vincent's words followed her like a ghost. Similar nervous spells. The message was clear. She was walking the same path Julia had traveled before her. That evening, as Harrison dined with Judge Blackwood, Abby sat alone in her room, staring out at the falling snow. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old timber and the distant sounds of Mary working in the kitchen. She laid a protective hand over her abdomen, feeling a fierce surge of determination. This child deserved better than to be born into this gilded cage, or worse, to become another tool for Harrison's control. I won't let him hurt you, she whispered to the life growing inside her. I promise. The soft knock at the door startled her. Mary entered with a dinner tray, her expression carefully neutral until the door closed behind her. Mr. Walsh and his brother will be out late, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge brought his new clerk to dinner. Abby nodded her thanks, but Mary lingered, fidgeting with her apron. Is there something else, Mary? The young woman glanced nervously at the door, then back at Abby. Miss Walsh, I shouldn't speak of it, but... What is it? Abby prompted gently, recognizing the fear in the girl's eyes. It's about Mrs. Julia, the first Mrs. Walsh. Mary's voice dropped even lower. Folks say she died of fever, but my cousin worked here then. She said Mrs. Julia was planning something before she disappeared. Abby's pulse quickened. Disappeared, not died. Mary nodded, eyes wide. The fever story came after. My cousin said Mrs. Julia had been asking questions about trails through the mountains, about the railroad stations in the next county over. She was trying to escape, Abby whispered. Then she was gone one morning. Mr. Walsh said she'd fallen ill overnight, died quickly. Closed casket funeral. Mary twisted her apron. A week later, my cousin was dismissed. No references. The implication hung in the air between them. Julia hadn't died, or if she had, not from any natural fever. Why are you telling me this now? Abby asked. Mary's eyes fell to Abby's hand still resting protectively over her abdomen. I hear things, Mrs. Walsh, about Dr. Thompson's visit, about nervous conditions. I couldn't stay silent, not again. A heavy silence fell between them. Thank you, Mary, Abby said finally. Your kindness won't be forgotten. After Mary left, Abby barely touched her dinner. Her mind raced with new possibilities. If Julia had tried to escape, she must have had help, a plan. And if she had succeeded rather than died, Abby had survived the war. She had survived the loss of her husband on the battlefield, the desperate years that followed. She would survive Harrison Walsh too, and this time she wouldn't be alone. She would protect her child whatever the cost. 3 days later, Abby's carefully monitored existence provided an unexpected opportunity. Harrison had been called away to deal with a collapsed mine shaft, and Vincent had accompanied him. With only Mary in the house, Abby seized the chance to search Harrison's study, something she'd never dared before. The massive oak desk dominated the room, its surface meticulously organized. She tried the drawers first, finding them locked except for one containing stationery. Disappointment washed over her until she noticed a slight discoloration in the wood paneling behind Harrison's chair. Heart pounding, she pressed against different sections until a small panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a wooden box intricately carved with pine trees. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. A silver ring nestled on velvet, too small for a man's hand. Beside it lay a folded paper yellowed with age. Unfolding it revealed a crude map of the mountains surrounding Pinewood Creek, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. In the margin, a message written in delicate handwriting, "Find the lighthouse on the mountain. He will help those like us." And below, a desperate postscript, "If you find this, I am already gone. May you fare better. J. Julia." This had been Julia's escape plan. Abby's hands shook as she examined the map more closely. Several locations were marked with small lily symbols, and a winding path led deep into the mountains to what appeared to be a structure labeled only as the lighthouse. The sound of the front door opening jolted her back to reality. Quickly, she replaced the box but slipped the ring and map into her pocket before closing the hidden panel. She had barely settled in the parlor with her embroidery when Vincent strode in, his clothes dusty from the mine. "Keeping yourself occupied, sister-in-law." His smile never reached his eyes. Harrison was detained. Some trouble with the Mexican workers demanding better conditions after the collapse. "I'm sorry to hear that," Abby replied evenly. "Were many hurt in the accident?" Vincent waved dismissively. "Two dead. Their own fault these foreigners don't follow safety protocols." Abby bit her tongue. She'd treated enough injured miners to know that safety protocols often meant working in clearly dangerous conditions rather than delaying production. "Harrison asked me to check on you." Vincent continued, helping himself to the brandy kept in the parlor. "Making sure you're resting as the doctor ordered." The way his eyes lingered on her made Abby's skin crawl. She'd always suspected Vincent harbored inappropriate feelings toward her, though he'd never acted on them. Harrison's possessions were untouchable even to his brother. "As you can see, I'm perfectly obedient," she said, gesturing to her embroidery. Vincent chuckled. "Are you, I wonder?" He sank into a chair opposite her, studying her face. "You remind me of Julia sometimes. That same hidden fire." Abby's needle paused mid-stitch. "You knew her well." "Better than most," he replied cryptically, "including my brother." A cold suspicion formed in Abby's mind. Had Vincent and Julia? The thought was cut short by the sound of Harrison's carriage arriving. Vincent stood, straightening his waistcoat. "Our little secret, he said, tapping the side of his nose before leaving to greet his brother. Alone again, Abby pressed her hand against her pocket, feeling the outline of the ring and map. Julia had found a way out. Somehow she had discovered this lighthouse in the person who could help women escape. And now Abby had that same chance. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, a frantic knocking at the back door aroused the household shortly after midnight. Abby, sleepless with planning, heard Harrison cursing as he descended the stairs. Wrapping herself in a robe, she followed quietly, pausing at the landing to observe the scene below. A miner, Rodriguez, she recalled, one of the few Mexican workers promoted to crew leader, stood in the kitchen, hat in hand, his expression desperate. "Please, Senor Walsh, my wife, the baby comes too early. There is much blood. Dr. Thompson is tending the judge's son after a hunting accident. We have no one else to turn to." Harrison's face darkened. "You come to my house in the middle of the night for a woman's problem." "Where's the midwife?" "Dead last winter, Senor. Please, Mrs. Walsh was a nurse in the war. Everyone knows this. My Lucia may die without help." Abby stepped forward before Harrison could refuse. "I'll come." Both men turned, Harrison's expression hardening into fury, Rodriguez's melting with relief. "You will do no such thing," Harrison snapped. "You're unwell yourself. Back to bed, Abigail." "A woman is dying, Harrison," she replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. "I can't ignore that." "You can and you will." Harrison stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "Remember your place, wife." Something snapped inside her, perhaps the same hidden fire Vincent had mentioned. "My place was on battlefields, saving men torn apart by cannon fire. My place was holding boys' hands as they died, calling for their mothers. I think I can manage a difficult birth." Harrison's hand twitched, and Abby knew he was restraining himself only because of their visitor. "We will discuss this later," he hissed. She turned to Rodriguez. "Let me gather my supplies. I'll be just a moment." As she hurried upstairs, her heart pounded with fear, and something else, a fierce, bright feeling she recognized as purpose. For the first time in years, she would use her skills to truly help someone, not just tend to minor ailments the town doctor was too busy to address. She collected her medical kit, kept hidden in her wardrobe, since Harrison had deemed her nursing unsuitable for a woman of her standing, and a warm cloak. As she passed Harrison again, she murmured, "I must do this. Please understand." His eyes were cold. "There will be consequences, Abigail." She knew there would be, but as she followed Rodriguez into the snowy night, the weight of Harrison's threat seemed lighter than the burden of remaining idle while someone suffered. The Rodriguez home was a small cabin on the outskirts of town near the other Mexican families' dwellings. Inside, Lucia lay on a bed, her young face contorted in pain, the sheets beneath her soaked with blood. Abby worked through the night, calling on skills long unused but never forgotten. The baby was breech, requiring her to turn it manually, a delicate, dangerous procedure. Lucia's screams echoed through the small cabin as Abby worked her own hands bloody to the wrists. "Stay with me, Lucia," she urged as the young woman's strength flagged. "Your baby needs you. Stay with me." Near dawn, a tiny cry filled the room as Abby delivered a small but perfect baby girl. The bleeding slowed, then stopped under Abby's careful ministrations. As she placed the swaddled infant in Lucia's arms, the new mother whispered, "Gracias, Angel. God sent you to us." "No," Abby smiled, exhaustion settling into her bones. "Your husband's courage brought me here." Rodriguez, who had paced outside throughout the ordeal, entered with tears streaming down his weathered face. "How can we repay you, Senora?" "Be happy," Abby replied simply. "Love each other. That's payment enough." As she prepared to leave, Lucia beckoned her closer. "The white lily," she whispered, nodding toward a small embroidered flower on her shawl. "Remember it if you ever need help." Abby's breath caught. The same lily symbol from Julia's map. "What does it mean?" Lucia's eyes darted to her husband, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "It marks those who help women in trouble, those who know the mountain road." The mountain road, the lighthouse. It was real, not just Julia's desperate fantasy. "Thank you," Abby whispered, a new resolve crystallizing within her. Harrison was waiting when she returned, his rage barely contained behind a mask of concern for any watching eyes. "You deliberately disobeyed me," he said once they were alone in their bedroom. "Made me look weak in front of one of the miners." "A woman and child would have died without help," Abby replied, too tired to be properly afraid. "Your first duty is to me." Harrison's voice remained eerily calm. "To this household, to obeying your husband. My first duty as a nurse is to those who need help." The blow came without warning, a backhanded strike that sent her reeling against the bedpost. Pain exploded across her cheekbone and she tasted blood. "Your duty as my wife supersedes all others," Harrison said, adjusting his cufflinks as if he'd merely brushed away a fly. "Since you insist on behaving like a willful child, you will be treated as one." He crossed to the door, turning the key in the lock. "You're confined to this room until you remember your place. Mary will bring your meals. The windows have been nailed shut, a necessary precaution given your deteriorating mental state." Panic flared in Abby's chest. "Harrison, please. Dr. Thompson will visit tomorrow to begin treatment for your nervous condition. I've heard laudanum can be quite effective in calming hysterical tendencies." The full horror of his plan dawned on her. He would drug her into compliance, perhaps even into a stupor that would mask her pregnancy until it was too late, or worse, cause her to lose the child entirely. "You can't do this," she whispered. Harrison's smile was cold. "I already have. Rest well, wife." The door closed, the key turned, and Abby was alone with the reality of her captivity. She sank to the floor, one hand protectively covering her abdomen, the other touching her bruised face. For hours she sat motionless, watching daylight fade into evening. Mary brought dinner on a tray, her eyes widening at Abby's bruised face, but she said nothing. The message was clear. There would be no help from that quarter, now not with Harrison watching so closely. As darkness fell, Abby moved to the window. Snow had begun falling again, thick flakes swirling in the night air. Below, Harrison's carriage pulled away from the house, likely heading to his regular Thursday card game with Judge Blackwood and the other town leaders. This might be her only chance. The windows were indeed nailed shut, but the nails had been hastily placed. Using a metal letter opener from her writing desk, Abby pried at the frame, ignoring the pain, as her fingernails tore and bled. After what seemed like hours, one nail loosened, then another. Breathless, she forced the window up just enough to squeeze through. The drop to the garden below was substantial, 3 stories to hard ground now covered in snow. If she jumped, she risked not only her own life, but her unborn child's. Her gaze fell on the heavy drapes. Methodically, she tore them into strips, tying them together to form a makeshift rope. She secured one end to the heavy bedpost, tugging to test its strength, then fed the rest through the window. It wouldn't reach all the way to the ground, but it would reduce the height of her fall significantly. Abby changed quickly into her warmest dress, layering her cloak over it. She tucked Julia's ring and map into her bodice, along with what little money she had hidden away. Her medical kit would have to be abandoned, too bulky for a journey on foot. With one last look at the room that had been her prison, Abby climbed onto the windowsill. The wind whipped at her hair as she lowered herself onto her makeshift rope, the rough fabric burning her palms as she descended. When she reached the end of her rope, still a good 12 feet from the ground, she closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and let go. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, pain shooting through her ankle as she crumpled into the snow. For a terrifying moment, she lay still assessing. Bruised, possibly a sprained ankle, but nothing broken, and most importantly, no cramping or bleeding to suggest harm to the baby. Using a fallen branch as a walking stick, Abby limped toward the tree line behind the property. The snowfall provided both blessing and curse. It covered her tracks but made travel infinitely more difficult. The wind cut through her clothes, and within minutes she was shivering violently. Still, she pressed on, following what she hoped was the direction indicated on Julia's map. The mountains loomed before her, dark sentinels against the night sky. Somewhere up there, if the map was correct, waited the mysterious lighthouse and the person who helped the women escape. Hours passed in a blur of cold pain and fear. The snow fell harder, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. Abby's strength began to fail, her injured ankle throbbing with each step. When she stumbled for the third time, rising became almost impossible. "Keep moving," she muttered to herself, teeth chattering. "Keep moving or die." Ahead, the ground seemed to rise sharply, the foothills of the mountains proper. Using her makeshift walking stick, Abby began to climb, clinging to exposed roots and rocks. The wind howled around her, drowning out all other sounds, including the crumbling of earth beneath her feet. With a sickening lurch, the ground gave way. Abby clawed desperately at roots, rocks, anything to stop her fall, but momentum carried her over the edge of what she now realized was a steep ravine. The world spun, flashes of sky and earth alternating as she tumbled down the slope. A searing pain exploded in her side as she struck something hard. Then darkness engulfed her as her head hit stone. Her last conscious thought was of the child she carried, the tiny life depending on her survival. Then merciful blackness claimed her. Pain returned first, sharp, insistent pain in her ribs and head. Then awareness of warmth of furs against her skin, of a crackling fire nearby. Abby forced her eyes open, blinking against the firelight. She lay on a bed in what appeared to be a small cabin. Rough-hewn log walls surrounded her, a stone fireplace casting flickering shadows. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and bookshelves lined one wall, unexpected in such a rustic setting. When she tried to move, pain lanced through her side, drawing a gasp from her lips. "Don't try to sit up yet." A deep voice came from the shadows. "3 ribs bruised, maybe cracked. Concussion, frostbite on your fingers and toes. You're lucky to be alive." A figure moved into the firelight, a tall man with broad shoulders and a thick beard. A jagged scar ran from his temple to cheek, pulling slightly at one corner of his mouth. His eyes, dark in the dim light, studied her with an intensity that might have been frightening if not for the gentleness in his hands as he checked her pulse. "Who?" Her voice cracked, throat parched. He helped her sip water from a tin cup. "Name's Daniel Frost. Most around here call me the Mountain Man." He paused, assessing her reaction. "You were following Julia's map, weren't you?" Shock rendered Abby momentarily speechless. "Then, how did you found it clutched in your hand when I pulled you from that ravine?" He explained, nodding toward the table where the now dried map lay. Recognized her handwriting. "You're not the first to come looking for the lighthouse." "The lighthouse," Abby repeated. "It's real then." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Real enough, though not what most expect." She tried to process this information through the fog of pain. "You're him, the one who helps women escape." Daniel didn't confirm or deny, instead moving to a pot hanging near the fire. "Willow bark tea for the pain," he said, pouring steaming liquid into a cup. "Best I can offer until the storm passes." "Storm?" Abby accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Blizzard, worst in years." He nodded toward the window where snow pelted against glass. "No one will be searching until it clears. Even then, they'll be looking for a body, not a survivor." The implication sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her ordeal. Harrison would assume she'd died in the storm, a convenient end to a troublesome wife. No inconvenient questions, no scandal. Just another tragic tale of a woman's fragile constitution. "The baby," she blurted suddenly, hand flying to her abdomen. "Is the baby—" Daniel's expression softened. "No bleeding or cramping while you were unconscious." That's a good sign. The child is likely safe, though you'll need to rest. Relief flooded through her, followed by wariness. How did you know I was with child? I was a medic during the war before I studied for the ministry, he explained. I've learned to recognize the signs. A minister. Abby couldn't hide her surprise. This scarred, solitary man seemed far removed from any church she knew. Pain flickered across his features. Once, long ago. Something in his tone discouraged further questions on that subject. Instead, Abby asked, how long was I unconscious? Nearly 2 days. He moved to stoke the fire. Fever broke last night. 2 days. The knowledge left her dizzy. 2 days lost, 2 days during which anything could have happened in Pinewood Creek. You should sleep, Daniel said, noticing her exhaustion. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Despite her racing mind, Abby found herself succumbing to the willow bark tea's sedative effects. As darkness claimed her again, she was vaguely aware of Daniel covering her with another fur, his movements gentle despite his imposing size. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she slept without fear. Abby woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small windows. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world outside transformed into a glittering white expanse. Her pain had dulled to a manageable ache, and when she carefully pushed herself to sitting, her head remained clear. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, but a cup of water and bowl of what appeared to be stew had been left on a small table beside the bed. As she reached for them, she noticed her belongings neatly arranged nearby, including Julia's silver ring. The cabin door opened, admitting a blast of cold air, and Daniel's arms laden with firewood. He paused when he saw her sitting up. You're awake, good. He deposited the wood beside the fireplace. How's the pain? Manageable, she replied, watching as he moved about the cabin with efficient grace. For such a large man, he was surprisingly gentle in his movements. Thank you for saving my life. He acknowledged this with a slight nod. You're Harrison Walsh's wife. It wasn't a question, but Abby answered anyway. Yes, Abigail Morgan Walsh, the nurse who served in the war. Again, not a question. You know of me, Daniel added wood to the fire. I make it my business to know about Pinewood Creek, especially about the women married to men like Harrison Walsh. The way he said Harrison's name with quiet contempt told Abby more than any lengthy explanation could have. You helped Julia escape, she said softly. Harrison's first wife. Daniel turned to face her fully. I help those who need helping. Julia found her way to me just as you did. Did she survive after she left here? He hesitated. She reached Sacramento safely. After that, he shrugged, the gesture containing volumes of unspoken possibility. And the others, Mary mentioned other women who disappeared. Some find new lives elsewhere. Some stay in safer places. Some, he trailed off, his expression darkening. Not everyone makes it out of Pinewood Creek alive. Abby absorbed this grim reality, thinking of the women whose names were whispered among the town's wives, those who had run off or died of mysterious fevers or nervous conditions. What will happen to me now? She asked finally. Daniel studied her thoughtfully. That depends on what you want, Mrs. Walsh. Abby, she corrected automatically. Please. He nodded once. Abby, then. Once you've healed, I can guide you to the railroad at Clearwater. From there, you could reach Denver or points east, start a new life. The offer tempted her freedom, safety for her child, a chance to rebuild, but something held her back. And if Harrison's men are watching the trains, or if he sends word ahead to look for me, there are other routes, slower but safer. Abby considered this hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen. My child deserves freedom, she said softly, a life without fear. Daniel's gaze followed the movement of her hand. Walsh doesn't know about the baby. No, and if he did? She couldn't complete the thought. He doesn't want children, Daniel finished for her. Too messy, too complicated, too likely to inherit what he believes is rightfully his alone. Abby's head snapped up. How could you know that? Something like grief passed over Daniel's scarred face. Because men like Harrison Walsh follow patterns. They all want the same things: control, power, legacy without complication. I've seen it before. The conviction in his voice suggested personal experience, but before Abby could question further, a sound outside the cabin caught their attention, the distant report of a rifle. Daniel was instantly alert, moving to the window with a hunter's silent grace. Stay here, he ordered, grabbing his own rifle from beside the door. Away from the windows. He slipped outside, leaving Abby alone with her racing thoughts. Minutes passed like hours until finally the door opened and Daniel returned, expression grim. "Hunters," he said. "Walsh's men. 3 of them with tracking dogs." Fear clutched at Abby's throat. "They're looking for me." "Yes, but they won't find you, not if we move quickly." He crossed to a chest in the corner, pulling out warmer clothes. "There's another cabin higher up, more isolated. We need to reach it before nightfall." Abby couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Daniel paused in his preparations, looking at her directly. "You think I'd send you alone into these mountains with Walsh's men hunting you?" The simplicity of his response made Abby ashamed of her suspicion. "No, I'm sorry. I'm not used to men who help without wanting something in return." Something flickered in his eyes, anger but not directed at her. "I know what kind of man Harrison Walsh is. I know what he's done to you and to others before you." He handed her a coat and boots. "I'm not him." As Abby donned the winter gear, she noticed Daniel packing supplies with practiced efficiency, food, medicine, ammunition. He moved like a man accustomed to quick departures. "What about Julia's ring and map?" she asked, gesturing to her belongings. Daniel considered. "The map, yes, it might be useful. The ring?" He paused. "It's your choice. But remember, anything that connects you to your old life is a potential danger." Abby picked up the silver band, rolling it between her fingers. This small circle of metal had belonged to a woman who had stood where she now stood, facing the same fears, the same choices. Had Julia found safety, or had Harrison's reach extended beyond the mountains after all? She slipped the ring into her pocket, not to keep, but as a reminder of what was at stake. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across pristine snow. Daniel led the way, breaking trail through drifts that sometimes reached his knees. Abby followed in his footsteps, each breath sending daggers through her injured ribs. They climbed steadily, the forest growing denser, the air thinner. Twice Daniel called a halt, allowing Abby to rest. He never asked if she could continue, never suggested she wasn't strong enough. He simply waited until her breathing steadied, then pressed on. As light began to fade, they crested a ridge. Below, nestled against the mountain face and sheltered by towering pines, stood a smaller cabin. From this angle, it was nearly invisible, its log construction blending with the surrounding trees, its roof covered in snow that disguised its outline. The lighthouse. Abby breathed, understanding now why Julia had called it that. From the valley below, a light in its window would appear as a distant star, a beacon to those who knew to look for it. Daniel glanced at her sharply. "How did you know that name?" "It was on Julia's map. Find the lighthouse on the mountain. He will help those like us." A shadow crossed his face. Julia was hopeful, sometimes too hopeful. Before Abby could ask what he meant, a sound reached them, the distant baying of hounds carried on the evening wind. "They're following our trail," Daniel said grimly. "We need to move now." They descended toward the hidden cabin as darkness fell, the howling of the dogs growing closer with each passing minute. Behind them, men's voices called to each other through the gathering night. The hunters had picked up their scent. The chase was on. The lighthouse cabin clung to the mountainside like a stubborn memory, half hidden among ancient pines. Unlike Daniel's main dwelling, this structure seemed designed to disappear. Its weathered logs darkened by years of snow and wind, its single window positioned to be invisible from below. Only when standing directly before it did the cabin fully reveal itself. Daniel led Abby inside, securing the door behind them. The interior was smaller than his other cabin, but similarly organized: a wood stove, a narrow bed, shelves of supplies. He moved with practiced efficiency, lighting a lantern, but keeping its flame low. "No fire yet," he said softly. "Smoke would give us away." The baying of hounds echoed through the mountains, closer now. Abby's heart hammered against her bruised ribs. "They'll find us." "No." Daniel pulled a trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Down, quickly." Abby hesitated only a moment before lowering herself into the unknown, wincing as her injured body protested. The space below was cold and smelled of earth and pine. Daniel followed, pulling the trap door closed above them. In the darkness, she heard him moving. Then a match flared, and he lit a small candle set in a niche in the earthen wall, illuminating what appeared to be a root cellar converted to a hiding place. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with preserved food and water. A narrow cot occupied another corner, with blankets neatly folded. "The Chinese miners dug this," Daniel explained, his voice low. When the anti-Chinese riots swept through the territory 10 years ago, I've expanded it since. You've hidden others here. It wasn't a question. He nodded. This is where the Moonlight Road truly begins. We'll wait until they pass, then move at first light. Above them, silence stretched taut as a wire. Then came the crunch of boots on snow approaching the cabin. Men's voices muffled, but distinguishable. Spread out. Check the perimeter. Tracks lead right to the door. Could be the mountain man's place. Heard he has cabins all over these hills. Walsh wants his wife back alive, he said. After what she's done, he'll kill her himself. Abby pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sound. Daniel moved closer, not touching her, but offering his presence as reassurance. The cabin door above creaked open. Boots stomped across the floor. Drawers opened and closed. A man cursed. Nothing. Place looks abandoned. Fire's cold. Dogs are still going crazy. Probably just animals. Wolves, maybe. We should burn it. Send a message to anyone helping her. A pause. No, too much snow. Might start a forest fire. Walsh wants his wife, not a mountain of ash. We'll head back, try again tomorrow with more men. The door slammed shut. Footsteps receded. The hound's baying gradually faded into the distance. Still, Daniel and Abby remained motionless, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. Finally, Daniel exhaled. They're gone. For now. Abby sank onto the cot, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. She had fled her husband, a powerful man with resources and connections. Men were hunting her through the wilderness. If caught, she would face imprisonment in her own home, or worse. Why do they want me back so badly, she whispered. Harrison has never loved me. I'm just property to him. Daniel settled on a wooden crate across from her, the candle's glow casting half his face in shadow, the scar on his cheek a dark line against his skin. It's not about love, he said quietly. It's about control, about not letting anyone, especially a woman, defy them. If one wife escapes, others might try. His eyes met hers, dark and knowing. The whole system they have built begins to crack. System. You've seen it yourself, the missing women, the convenient fevers and consumptions, the closed caskets, the wives who supposedly run off with traveling salesmen. A chill ran through Abby that had nothing to do with the coal cellar. How many in Pinewood Creek alone? At least 7 in the past decade that I know of, more in other mining towns across the territory. And no one investigates. No one questions. Who would investigate? The sheriff, the territorial judge. Daniel's voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if distancing himself from horrors too large to contain. They're all part of it. The rich men of these towns, the mine owners, the bankers, the politicians, they've created a brotherhood. They protect each other. Their wives are just interchangeable parts. Abby thought of the women whose names were whispered in Pinewood Creek, the ones who had vanished, died young, or fled without a trace. How many had been silenced for daring to challenge their husband's control? Tell me about Julia, she said suddenly. Harrison's first wife. You helped her escape. Something flickered across Daniel's face, pain perhaps, or regret. Yes. And she never reached San Francisco. The guide sent word they had reached Sacramento. After that, nothing. He paused. She could have changed her name, moved on. Or Harrison found her. Abby finished the thought he wouldn't voice. Daniel nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. I should have gone with her myself, but there were others who needed help, then a Chinese family of the father injured in a mine collapse. I couldn't leave them. It wasn't your fault, Abby said gently. His laugh was bitter. Wasn't it I started this the Moonlight Road? I made promises of safety I couldn't keep. Why? Abby leaned forward slightly. Why did you start it? Daniel was silent for so long, Abby thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. Because of my sister Sarah. He spoke the name like a prayer. She married Judge Blackwood's brother Edward. The first year seemed happy enough. Then the bruises began. The accidents. He paused, lost in memory. I was serving as pastor in Pinewood Creek then. I tried to intervene. Spoke to Edward man to man. Counseled Sarah to be patient, to pray. Self-loathing twisted his features. I spouted scripture about submission and endurance while my sister withered before my eyes. Abby's throat tightened. What happened to her? She died of brain fever after a fall down the stairs. Closed casket funeral. Edward remarried within 6 months. Daniel's hands curled into fists. I demanded an investigation. Went to the sheriff, the town council even wrote to the territorial governor. No one would listen. Instead, they closed ranks. Suddenly, my congregation dwindled. Rumors spread that I was unstable, drinking too much inappropriate with female parishioners. They destroyed your reputation. They tried to destroy me completely. One night, Edward and several others, including Harrison Walsh and Judge Blackwood, caught me alone after services, beat me half to death, and threw me off Eagle Cliff, the same place where I found you. Abby gasped. How did you survive? Providence, stubbornness, hate. His smile was grim. A band of Chinese miners found me, nursed me back to health in a hidden camp deep in the mountains. By the time I recovered, Edward had spread word that I'd fled town in disgrace. My mother publicly disowned me. Sarah was forgotten. But you didn't leave. You stayed and created the Moonlight Road. I couldn't save Sarah, but I could try to save others. His eyes locked with hers. That's why Harrison wants you back so desperately, Abby. It's not just about you, it's about me, about proving that I can't protect the women they've marked as theirs. The realization struck Abby like a physical blow. She wasn't just running from an abusive husband. She had unwittingly stepped into a war that had been raging for years, a war between powerful men who saw women as possessions and one man determined to break their system. I'm sorry, she whispered, for Sarah, for all of them. Daniel looked away. Don't be sorry, be angry. Anger keeps you alive in these mountains. Dawn painted the snow in shades of rose and gold. Daniel had emerged from the cellar an hour earlier to scout the surroundings, returning with news that their pursuers had indeed retreated to town. But they'll be back, he said, packing supplies into a rucksack. With more men, maybe dogs again. Abby nodded, wrapping a woolen scarf around her neck. Her nurse's training had taught her to focus on immediate problems. Right now, that meant survival. Where will we go? Daniel hesitated. There's a place about half a day's journey higher up. Few know about it. Another cabin. More than that. He shouldered the pack. You'll see when we get there. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern ridges, Daniel breaking trail through knee-deep snow. Abby followed, her body aching but her resolve firm. The higher they climbed, the more spectacular the views became, vast expanses of white-clad peaks, stretching to the horizon, valleys filled with mist forests of pine and fir, standing sentinel on every slope. Under different circumstances, Abby might have found it beautiful. Now she saw only exposure, vulnerability. Every open space was a place where hunters might spot them. They paused at midday in the shelter of an overhanging cliff. Daniel produced jerky and hardtack from his pack, along with a flask of strong coffee. They ate in silence, conserving energy. Tell me about the war, Daniel said suddenly. You were a nurse. Abby looked up, surprised by the personal question from a man who had shared so little of himself until now. Yes, with the Union Army. I volunteered after my first husband died at Antietam. You must have seen terrible things. Terrible, yes. She searched for words. But also moments of grace. Boys not old enough to shave facing death with incredible courage. Surgeons working until they collapsed from exhaustion. Soldiers from opposite sides sharing water tobacco stories. And afterward, how did you come to marry Harrison Walsh? Abby stared at the steam rising from her coffee. After the war, there weren't many options for unmarried women. I tried to continue nursing, but the hospitals preferred men. She paused, weighing how much to reveal. I was staying with a cousin in St. Louis when Harrison appeared. He was charming then. Told stories of Montana territory, of building a new life away from the war's shadows. I was naive enough to believe him. You were looking for escape, Daniel observed. There's no shame in that. Perhaps not, but I exchanged one battlefield for another. She met his gaze. You understand that, I think. Moving from one war to the next. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Before he could respond, a sound reached them. Distant but distinct. Voices carried on the mountain air. Daniel was on his feet, instantly packing hastily. They've returned sooner than expected. We need to move now. They abandoned their rest, pushing upward through increasingly rugged terrain. The voices faded, then returned, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions, a trick of the mountain acoustics. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered and snow began to fall again, a blessing that would cover their tracks, but a curse that made travel more treacherous. Abby's breath came in painful gasps, her ribs protesting each step. Still she pressed on, following Daniel's broad back through the gathering storm. They crested a ridge to find a narrow path winding between towering rock formations. Daniel moved more cautiously here, testing each step. "Careful," he warned. "Sheer drop to the right. Stay close to the wall." Abby pressed herself against the cold stone, shuffling sideways along the precarious path. The wind tore at her clothes, threatening to pluck her from the mountainside. Through the swirling snow, she could make out only glimpses of the chasm beside them, a dizzying void that seemed to hunger for the unwary. After what felt like hours, the path widened, turning inward toward the mountain itself. Ahead loomed a dark opening, a cave entrance partially hidden by an outcropping of rock. "Almost there," Daniel called over his shoulder. They reached the cave just as the storm intensified, wind howling like a living thing around the mountains. Inside, protected from the elements, Abby leaned against the cold stone wall, struggling to catch her breath. Daniel produced a lantern from his pack, lighting it to reveal a tunnel extending deeper into the mountain. "This way. Watch your step." The passage wound inward, sometimes narrowing until they had to turn sideways to proceed, other times opening into small chambers, where evidence of human presence, stacked firewood, crude benches, suggested this was more than a natural formation. "The Chinese miners again?" Abby asked, gesturing to a support beam shoring up a section of ceiling. Daniel nodded. "They knew these mountains better than anyone. Created a whole network of passages during the worst of the persecution." The tunnel curved sharply, then opened into a space so unexpected that Abby stopped short, unable to process what she was seeing. They stood at the edge of an enormous cavern, its ceiling lost in shadows despite Daniel's lantern. But it wasn't the size that stole Abby's breath. It was what the cavern contained. Cabins, a dozen small structures built within the protected space of the mountain itself. Some were little more than lean-tos, others more substantial dwellings with stone chimneys that disappeared into flues carved through the rock. Between them ran narrow pathways, some lined with what appeared to be garden plots covered for winter. At the center, a spring bubbled up from the ground, forming a small pool before disappearing again into the earth. Most surprising of all were the people. As Daniel held up his lantern, figures emerged from the cabins, women of various ages, some with children clinging to their skirts. A few men as well, mostly elderly or visibly injured. Their faces reflected a mixture of wariness and recognition as they spotted Daniel. "What is this place?" Abby whispered. "The end of the Moonlight Road for some, a beginning for others." Daniel moved forward, raising his voice to address the gathered people. "It's all right, she's one of us." A young woman stepped forward, her swollen belly indicating advanced pregnancy. With a start, Abby recognized her, Sarah, the wife of a miner from the North Ridge, who had disappeared 3 months earlier after her husband had been killed in a cave-in. "Mrs. Walsh," Sarah asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "Just Abby now," she replied softly. Sarah's face broke into a tentative smile. "They said you helped Rodriguez's wife, that you were one of the few women from town who showed kindness." Before Abby could respond, a child's cry echoed through the cavern. From one of the larger cabins emerged a slender figure carrying an infant. As she approached, Abby gasped. "Mrs. Blackwood." Catherine Blackwood looked nothing like the frail, consumptive wife who had always sat silently beside the judge at town functions. Her face had color, her movements were steady, and the persistent cough had vanished. "Hello, Abigail," she said. "I see you found the Moonlight Road after all." The cavern settlement, which its inhabitants called Haven, was a marvel of ingenuity and desperation. Originally discovered by Chinese miners fleeing persecution, it had been expanded over the years by those seeking refuge from the brutal realities of frontier life. A natural chimney in the rock allowed smoke from carefully managed fires to escape without revealing the settlement's location. The spring provided fresh water year-round. Small gardens supplemented by hunting and trading with sympathetic outsiders sustained the community through the harsh mountain winters. "Most don't stay permanently," Catherine explained as she showed Abby around. "This is a way station, a place to heal and prepare for the journey onward." The infant in her arms fussed and Catherine adjusted her hold. This is Emma, not the judge's child, of course. He was incapable, though he blamed me for our childlessness. She paused. Emma's father was a young man who worked in our stables. The judge had him whipped and driven from town when he discovered us together. I feared for my life after that and for my unborn child's. So you faked your illness, Abby realized. The consumption. Catherine nodded. Daniel provided herbs that, when taken regularly, produced symptoms similar enough to fool the doctor. When the time was right and I worsened dramatically, the judge sent for specialists from Helena, but before they arrived, I'd already escaped up the mountain. And the judge believes you are dead. A closed casket funeral was held 2 weeks ago. I'm told he played the grieving widower convincingly. Her smile was bitter. He'll remarry within months, I expect. Some other unfortunate woman who doesn't yet know what he really is. They continued their tour, Catherine introducing Abby to other residents of Haven. There was Rachel, who had fled her father's house when he tried to marry her to a man 50 years her senior. Min Lee, whose minor husband had been killed in an accident after organizing workers. Old Jacob, a former slave who had made his way west after the war, only to find new forms of bondage in the mining camps. All of them shared the same haunted look behind their eyes, people who had seen the darkness that could live in human hearts, who had survived by their wits and the kindness of strangers. And everyone here is part of the Moonlight Road, Abby asked. In one way or another, Catherine confirmed. Some stay to help newcomers. Others move on but establish safe houses along the route west. A few return to the world with new identities, sending information or supplies when they can. She led Abby to a small cabin near the spring. You can rest here. There are clean clothes inside. Rachel will bring food shortly. Left alone, Abby surveyed her temporary home. Like Daniel's cabins, it was simple but well organized. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small table and chair, a shelf holding a few books, candles and basic supplies. On the table lay fresh bandages and a jar of salve. Someone, having noticed her injuries, needed attention. For the first time since fleeing Pinewood Creek, Abby felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Here, surrounded by others who understood, who had walked similar paths, perhaps she could finally breathe. She changed into the clean clothes, a simple skirt and blouse worn but well mended, and washed her face in a basin of spring water. As she smoothed her hair back, she caught sight of her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. The face that stared back was thinner, paler, but somehow more alive than the ghost she glimpsed in the Walsh Mansion's windows weeks ago. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Daniel stood outside, looking uncomfortable in the confined space of the settlement after the freedom of his mountain. You're settling in, he asked, more statement than question. Yes, it's not what I expected. Few find what they expect in these mountains. He hesitated, then gestured toward the main cavern. There's someone you should meet when you're ready. Curious, Abby followed him through the settlement to a cabin set slightly apart from the others. Unlike the rough-hewn dwellings surrounding it, this structure showed signs of skilled craftsmanship, detailed carvings on the doorframe glass in its single window. Daniel knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. The cabin's interior was dominated by a large work table covered with papers, maps, and what appeared to be ledgers. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books and rolled documents. Seated at the table was an elderly woman with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her posture rigid despite her advanced years. When she looked up, her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through Abby like physical things. So, the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong, this is Harrison's latest victim. Abby stiffened at the blunt assessment. Before she could respond, Daniel stepped forward. Abby, this is Elizabeth Frost, my mother. Shock rendered Abby momentarily speechless. Elizabeth Frost, widow of Pinewood Creek's founder-owner of the town bank and several businesses, renowned for her coldness toward other women and her rigid adherence to propriety. The same Elizabeth who, according to Daniel, had publicly disowned him. You seem surprised, Mrs. Walsh, Elizabeth observed dryly. Did you think a woman of my age and standing would be comfortably ensconced in town, turning a blind eye to men's barbarities? You've always seemed so unsympathetic, judgmental, a willing participant in the subjugation of other women. Elizabeth's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Good. That was precisely the impression I wished to convey. Abby looked between mother and son, confusion evident on her face. Daniel's expression remained unreadable, but tension radiated from his posture. Perhaps you should explain, Mother. He said the word carrying a weight of unresolved history. Elizabeth sighed, gesturing for Abby to sit in a chair opposite her. The Moonlight Road didn't begin with my son, Mrs. Walsh. It began with me nearly 30 years ago, when my husband decided I had outlived my usefulness. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. William Frost built Pinewood Creek from nothing, it's true. But he built it on the backs of desperate men and the bodies of inconvenient women. She pulled her sleeve back down with dignity. When I discovered his involvement in the disappearance of a young widow who had refused his advances, he tried to add me to his list of victims. But you survived, Abby said softly. I did more than survive. Elizabeth's voice was matter-of-fact, as if describing nothing more significant than a change in the weather. I turned his weapon against him, then made it appear he had taken his own life in a fit of despair over mining debts. I inherited everything, his businesses, his properties, his position of respect in the community. And I used that position to help other women when I could while maintaining the facade of the proper widow. Yet you disowned your own son. Abby couldn't help saying, glancing at Daniel. Something like pain flickered across Elizabeth's face. Publicly, yes, it was necessary. When Daniel began asking too many questions about Sarah's death, making accusations against men like Judge Blackwood and Harrison Walsh, I knew they would silence him as they had silenced others. The only way to protect him and the Moonlight Road was to separate myself from him completely. A decision made without consulting me. Daniel said, his voice tight. You were half dead when they brought you to me. Elizabeth snapped, a flash of the formidable woman she must have been in her prime breaking through her elderly facade. What would you have had me do? Declare war on the most powerful men in the territory. We would both have been dead within a week, and with us any hope of helping others escape. The tension between mother and son crackled like static before a lightning strike. Decades of pain, misunderstanding, and separate battles fought for the same cause had created a chasm that even their shared purpose couldn't fully bridge. Abby cleared her throat. So all this time you've been working together, the Moonlight Road has operated with your knowledge, your resources. Elizabeth nodded. I provide funds, information, occasional transportation for those fleeing east rather than west. Daniel oversees the mountain routes in this settlement. Others manage different sections of the road. It's a network, Mrs. Walsh. No single person knows all of it, which is how it has survived despite numerous attempts to destroy it. And the White Lily, the signals, my creation, Elizabeth said with a hint of pride. In the language of flowers, the lily represents rebirth. Appropriate, wouldn't you say? Before Abby could respond, a commotion arose outside. Voices called an alarm. Daniel was at the door instantly, Abby and Elizabeth following close behind. Rachel stood in the central area of the settlement, supporting a snow-covered figure who appeared on the verge of collapse. Blood stained the snow at their feet. Daniel, Rachel called. It's James, he's been shot. Daniel rushed forward, taking the weight of the injured man from Rachel. Abby followed automatically, that her nurse's instincts overriding everything else. The wounded man was young, early 20s perhaps, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. Blood seeped through his coat from a wound in his side. Inside, Daniel ordered, carrying James toward the nearest cabin. They laid him on a bed, Abby already rolling up her sleeves. I need hot water, clean cloth, whiskey, if you have it, and a medical kit, she said with calm authority. As the needed supplies arrived, Abby cut away the young man's blood-soaked clothing to reveal a bullet wound just below his ribs. The bullet's still inside, she murmured, probing gently. I need to remove it before infection sets in. She worked with practiced efficiency, years of battlefield medicine returning in a rush. Daniel assisted silently, his large hands surprisingly gentle, as he passed instruments and held the lantern to provide better light. Who is he? Abby asked as she extracted the bullet with a pair of forceps, dropping the misshapen lead into a bowl. James Carter, one of our scouts. He watches the trails, brings news from town guides, newcomers to the settlement. Daniel's expression was grim. If he's been shot, it means trouble. As if on cue, James groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Daniel, he gasped. They're coming. Walsh Holloway, the judge. They've gathered a posse claiming they're hunting a mountain lion that killed livestock. When? Daniel demanded. Dawn tomorrow. James winced as Abby began stitching his wound. They have maps. Someone's betrayed us. A chill ran through the room. Betrayal. The word hung in the air like poison. How many men? Daniel asked. 20, maybe more. Armed. James's voice weakened. I tried to lead them away from the main trails, but Holloway shot me. Said I was interfering with official business. Abby tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. He'll live, but he needs rest. No movement for at least a week. Daniel straightened his face, hardening into something like the mountain itself, implacable, unyielding. Spread the word, he told Rachel, who hovered nearby. Everyone prepares to evacuate. Take only what you can carry. We move at midnight. Evacuate? Abby asked as Rachel hurried away. Where can all these people go in the dead of winter? There are other shelters, smaller, more isolated. We've prepared for this possibility. Daniel's gaze was distant already, calculating routes, supplies, risks. The children and injured will go north to a settlement near the Canadian border. The others will disperse along different sections of the road. And us? Abby asked quietly. Daniel's eyes refocused on her, something unreadable in their depths. That depends on you. If you want to leave with the others, I'll arrange it. But there's another option. What option? We return to Pinewood Creek. Abby stared at him, certain she had misheard. Return to the town where men are actively hunting me, where Harrison wants me dead or captive. Not as yourself, not openly. Daniel hesitated, then continued. James' news confirms what Mother has suspected for months. Someone in town is passing information about the Moonlight Road to Harrison and his allies. The betrayal came from inside. We need to discover who or more women will die. And you think I can help with that? You're a nurse. You could return in disguise, perhaps as a widow seeking work with Dr. Thompson. Your medical skills would give you access to information to households where women might be in danger. The audacity of the plan left Abby speechless. Return to the lion's den, to the very place she had fled at risk of her life. It would be dangerous, Daniel acknowledged. If you were discovered, Harrison would kill me, Abby finished flatly, or worse. Yes, which is why the choice must be yours. No one would think less of you for continuing west. Abby closed her eyes, thoughts whirling. The safer path lay ahead, following the Moonlight Road to California or Oregon, building a new life far from Harrison's reach. The logical choice, the sane choice. Yet something held her back. The memory of Lucia's bruised face as she labored to bring her child into the world. Catherine Blackwood's bitter smile as she spoke of the judge, remarrying some other unfortunate woman. Julia's ring evidence of another woman who had tried to escape. How many others were still trapped? How many lived in fear, not knowing the Moonlight Road existed? She opened her eyes to find Daniel watching her, his scarred face impassive, but his eyes betraying understanding. He knew what it was to be haunted by those left behind. If I returned, she said slowly, I wouldn't be alone, you'd be nearby. I would never ask you to face this without support, he promised. Mother maintains a hunting cabin on the edge of town. I could stay there close enough to help if needed. Abby took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in her ribs, a reminder of what waited in Pinewood Creek. Yet that pain also strengthened her resolve. She had survived Harrison's brutality. She had survived the wilderness. Perhaps she had been spared for a purpose greater than her own freedom. The war taught me something, she said quietly. Sometimes survival itself becomes a form of resistance. Living well despite what they have done to you, that's a victory they can't take away. She straightened her shoulders. Decision made. I'll go back. Not as Harrison's wife, but as someone new, someone stronger. For the first time since she had met him, Daniel smiled, a real smile that transformed his stern features, softening the scar and lighting his eyes. You already are stronger, Abby. Stronger than any of them know. Midnight found haven in controlled chaos. Families gathered meager possessions. Children were bundled in layers of clothing. Scouts reported on weather conditions and trail safety. Through it all moved Elizabeth Frost, directing operations with the efficiency of a general. Abby had spent the hours since James's arrival helping prepare medical supplies for each group. Her hands worked automatically, rolling bandages and measuring herbs into packets, while her mind grappled with the enormity of her decision. Return to Pinewood Creek. Face Harrison and Vincent, albeit in disguise. Seek out a traitor who had already endangered countless lives. Fear and doubt gnawed at her resolve. Yet underneath ran a current of something unfamiliar, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since the war, when her skills had meant the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers. "You should rest," Catherine said, appearing at her side with a cup of tea. "Tomorrow will bring challenges enough." Abby accepted the tea gratefully. "There's too much to do." "Others can manage." Catherine sat beside her on a bench near the spring. "Tell me what made you decide to return. Few who escape that town ever willingly go back." "I'm not entirely sure," Abby admitted. "Perhaps because I couldn't save the boys who died under my care during the war. Perhaps because I'm tired of running." Catherine studied her thoughtfully. "Or perhaps because you've glimpsed something in Daniel that makes you believe this fight can be won." Heat rose in Abby's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Catherine's smile was knowing. "I've watched him these past months. He's carried this burden alone for so long. His sister's death, the women he couldn't save, the constant weight of others' survival. Since you arrived, something has changed. He seems lighter." "We barely know each other," Abby protested. "Sometimes the soul recognizes what the mind has yet to understand." Catherine rose, her infant daughter stirring in the sling across her chest. "Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. The Moonlight Road needs people willing to stand and fight, not just flee." As Catherine walked away, Abby's gaze drifted to where Daniel stood with his mother examining maps spread on a makeshift table. Their heads were bent close together, the familial resemblance evident despite decades of estrangement. They moved with similar economy, spoke with similar directness, two pieces of the same formidable puzzle. What would it be like, Abby wondered, to have such strength in your blood, to come from people who fought rather than submitted? Her own parents had been gentle souls, her father a bookkeeper, her mother a midwife. They had taught her kindness, service duty, valuable lessons, but perhaps insufficient armor for the world she now inhabited. Daniel looked up suddenly as if sensing her scrutiny. Their eyes met across the cavern, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared purpose, shared risk, perhaps shared fate. Abby forced herself to look away first. Such thoughts were dangerous. She was still legally married regardless of her flight from Harrison, and Daniel was a man with a mission that left no room for entanglements. Yet as she resumed her work, Abby couldn't deny the warmth that had bloomed in her chest at that brief connection. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as property, not as an ornament, but as a person of value, of substance. Whatever came next in Pinewood Creek, she would carry that feeling with her like a talisman against the darkness. The evacuation of Haven proceeded in stages throughout the night. First, the children and elderly, guided by Rachel and two other women, took the northern trail toward the Canadian settlement. Next went those heading west, including Catherine and baby Emma, who would follow the traditional Moonlight Road to San Francisco. By dawn, only a handful remained: Elizabeth, Daniel, Abby, and three men who would act as scouts and messengers between them once they separated. "The posse will focus on the eastern slopes first," Daniel explained, tracing routes on a map. "That gives us time to circle behind them and approach Pinewood Creek from the west. We'll travel separately once we're closer to town, less conspicuous that way." Abby nodded, studying the disguise Elizabeth had provided: a brown wig, spectacles, clothing appropriate for a middle-aged widow of modest means. "Remember your story," Elizabeth instructed. "You're Clara Bennett, recently widowed when your husband's farm failed in Minnesota. You trained as a nurse during the war and are seeking employment with Dr. Thompson." Clara, Abby repeated, testing the name. Sarah's sister's name, she realized, a small tribute to the woman whose death had sparked this quiet rebellion. "What about you?" she asked Daniel. "Won't you be recognized in town?" "Few would connect the disgraced former pastor with the mountain man folk whisper about," he replied. "Besides, I won't enter town openly. Mother's cabin provides a vantage point without exposure." Elizabeth handed Abby a small leather pouch. "Emergency funds and this." She pressed a familiar object into Abby's palm, the stone with the carved lily. "If you need to identify yourself to an ally or mark a location as safe." The gravity of what they were attempting settled over Abby. They were not just returning to hostile territory. They were actively seeking to undermine a network of powerful, dangerous men. If caught, death might be the most merciful outcome. "One last thing," Elizabeth said, producing a small vial. "Belladonna extract, diluted, it causes symptoms similar to fever." "Concentrated?" She met Abby's eyes steadily. "A last resort if capture is imminent. I've seen what happens to women who fall into their hands. Sometimes death is preferable. Abby pocketed the vial without comment. She had seen enough in war to understand Elizabeth's pragmatism. As they prepared to depart, Daniel drew Abby aside. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. "No one would blame you." Abby looked up at him, this scarred, stoic man who had saved her life and now offered her a chance to save others. She thought of the soldiers she'd nursed, boys who'd marched toward almost certain death because they believed in something larger than themselves. "I'm not changing my mind," she said firmly. "I'm a nurse. I go where I'm needed." Relief and something warmer flickered in Daniel's eyes. Without warning, he reached out his rough hand gentle against her cheek. The touch lasted only a moment, brief enough to be imagined, long enough to be felt. "Then let's go," he said, dropping his hand. "Pinewood awaits." They emerged from the cavern into a world transformed by fresh snow and morning light. Below, the mountain slopes stretched toward the distant rooftops of Pinewood Creek, the town that had once been Abby's prison and would now become her battlefield. Somewhere in those streets walked a traitor. Somewhere in those houses waited women who needed the moonlight road. And somewhere beyond this dangerous mission lay a future Abby could barely imagine, one where she might be not just a survivor, but a savior. She took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, squared her shoulders, and began the descent. Pinewood Creek emerged from the morning mist like a painting, half-erased church steeple. First, then the clustered buildings of Main Street, and finally the grand houses perched on the hillside like predators surveying their domain. From her vantage point on the western ridge, Abby barely recognized the town that had been her prison for 6 years. It seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. "Different when you see it from above," Daniel said quietly, standing beside her, "less imposing." Abby nodded, adjusting the brown wig that transformed her golden hair. The spectacles pinched her nose and the plain dark clothes felt stiff and unfamiliar, but the disguise was necessary. Clara Bennett needed to enter Pinewood Creek unremarked, unrecognized. "Remember," Daniel continued, "Dr. Thompson's office is on Pine Street behind the apothecary. He lost his nurse to consumption 2 months ago. Mother's inquiries suggest he's desperate for help. And if he recognizes me—" "He won't," Daniel assured her. "Thompson treated you, what, twice in 6 years, always in your home with Harrison hovering nearby. The man is half blind without his spectacles anyway." True enough, Dr. Thompson was elderly, distracted, and perpetually overworked, the only physician serving both the town and outlying homesteads. He had treated Abby for female hysteria when her hands shook too badly after one of Harrison's rages, and once for a fall down the stairs that had left her with cracked ribs, not unlike her current injury. "What if Harrison sees me, or Vincent?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Harrison rarely ventures below Hill Street unless it's to the mine offices or the bank. Vincent is more unpredictable, but he's hunting the mountains with the posse. By the time they return empty-handed, you'll be established in your new identity." Abby took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to calm. "And you'll be at the hunting cabin if I need to reach you. Mother's messenger, Jacob, will check the hollow oak behind the cemetery each evening. Leave a white stone if you need contact." Daniel hesitated, then added, "But only in true emergency. Any communication increases risk." The reality of their plans settled over Abby like a physical weight. For days, perhaps weeks, she would be alone in enemy territory. No one to trust, no one who knew her true identity, just her wits and courage standing between her and discovery. As if sensing her thoughts, Daniel turned to face her fully. "You can still choose the road west, Abby. No one would think less of you." She shook her head. "I've made my decision." "Then take this." He pressed something into her palm, a small knife in a leather sheath. "Keep it hidden but accessible." Abby slipped the knife into her boot, oddly comforted by its presence. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain breeze stirring pine needles around them. So much remained unsaid between them. Questions, fears, the strange bond that had formed in their short time together. But the mission ahead left no room for such indulgences. "I should go," Abby said at last. "The morning stage will be arriving soon. Better if I'm seen coming into town with it like any other traveler." Daniel nodded. "I'll watch until you're safely in town." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Abby!" She looked back. The sunlight caught in his beard, turning it bronze against his weathered skin. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with words, then simply said, "Be careful." The inadequacy of the phrase hung between them, containing all they couldn't express. I will, she promised, and began her descent toward Pinewood Creek. Dr. Samuel Thompson's office smelled of carbolic acid, camphor, and resignation. The waiting room, little more than a narrow hallway with 3 hard chairs, was empty when Abby entered, but sounds of movement came from the examination room beyond. She smoothed her plain dress, touched the spectacles to ensure they were properly seated, and called out, "Hello, Dr. Thompson." Shuffling footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal a man who had aged a decade in the 6 months since Abby had last seen him. His white hair stood in disarray, his waistcoat was stained, and deep shadows underlined his eyes. "Yes, what is it? I'm quite busy." He peered at her through smudged spectacles, recognition absent from his gaze. "Clara Bennett, doctor. I've come about the nursing position. Mrs. Frost and Helena suggested you might need assistance." At the mention of Elizabeth Frost, Thompson's demeanor shifted from harried to cautious. "Agatha sent you. I wasn't aware she concerned herself with my staffing problems." "We attend the same church," Abby improvised. "When she learned I was seeking a position that would utilize my nursing experience, she mentioned Pinewood Creek." Thompson studied her for a moment, then sighed heavily. "Well, I can't deny I need the help. My last nurse, Mrs. Peterson, succumbed to consumption after the winter set in." He gestured to the cluttered waiting room. "As you can see, I've been managing alone since then, and poorly at that." "I'd be happy to begin immediately," Abby offered. "I can start by organizing your supplies, perhaps." Something like relief crossed the doctor's tired face. "Yes, that would be most helpful. I have rounds to make this afternoon, several cases of influenza among the mining families. If you could prepare the office for tomorrow's patients." "Of course, doctor." He retreated into the examination room, returning moments later with a ring of keys. "The medicine cabinet is locked. Can't be too careful with the laudanum and morphine. Supply room is through the back. Living quarters upstairs, should you need accommodation." "That's very kind. I've been staying at the boarding house, but closer proximity to patients would be advantageous." Thompson nodded absently, already pulling on his coat. "Miss Peterson lived upstairs. Room should still be habitable. Meals at the hall can be charged to my account within reason, of course." With that, he was gone, leaving Abby alone in the clinic that would become her base of operations in Pinewood Creek. She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself a moment of trembling relief. First hurdle cleared, she was in. Abby spent the afternoon as promised, organizing the chaotic supply room, sterilizing instruments, and preparing patient records for the following day. The work was familiar, almost comforting, so different from the ornamental existence Harrison had forced upon her. Here her skills mattered. Here she had purpose. As dusk approached, she ventured upstairs to examine what would be her new living quarters. Miss Peterson's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the alley behind the clinic. Perfect for coming and going unobserved should the need arise. Abby sat on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had undertaken. She was back in Pinewood Creek, the town where Harrison Walsh's word was law. If discovered, she faced not just death, but whatever cruelties his imagination could devise. Yet beneath the fear ran a current of fierce determination. She thought of Haven, of the women and children sheltering in the mountain's embrace, of Julia, who had fled but never reached safety, of Catherine and baby Emma, Mama traveling the moonlight road west, of Lucia, who had trusted Abby with her child's life. For them, she would be brave. For them, she would become Clara Bennett, unremarkable widow, while her eyes and ears worked to uncover the betrayer who threatened the road. A knock at the clinic's front door startled her from these thoughts. Composing herself into Clara's persona, modest, efficient, slightly timid, Abby descended the stairs to find a young girl waiting, her face tear-stained. "Please, ma'am," the child pleaded. "It's my ma. The baby's coming, but something's wrong. Pa sent me to fetch the doctor." "Dr. Thompson is making rounds," Abby explained gently, "but I'm his nurse. I can help until he returns." "Where do you live, child?" "Mining Camp, North Ridge. I'm Abigail Peters." Peters. The name tugged at Abby's memory. Then it clicked. Henry Peters, one of the miners who had supported Rodriguez's calls for safer conditions. The same Henry Peters who had mysteriously fallen down a mine shaft 2 weeks after Rodriguez's beating, breaking both legs. "Let me gather supplies, Abigail. I'll come at once." Minutes later, Abby followed the girl through Pinewood Creek's back streets, toward the humble dwellings that housed mining families. As they passed the grand church at the town center, a figure on the steps caught Abby's attention. A woman in expensive mourning clothes, her back rigid as a steel rod. Elizabeth Frost. Their eyes met briefly as Abby passed. No recognition showed on Elizabeth's face, but she inclined her head slightly, acknowledgement of a fellow player in their dangerous game. The mining camp sat on the town's northern edge, a collection of rough cabins and canvas tents that housed the workers who extracted Pinewood's wealth while receiving little in return. Children with hollow cheeks played in muddy lanes. Women hung washing on lines strung between dwellings, their hands red and raw from lye soap and cold water. Abigail led Abby to a cabin slightly larger than its neighbors, a foreman's privilege perhaps. Inside, a woman labored on a bed in the corner, her face contorted in pain, her nightdress soaked with sweat and blood. Mrs. Peters, Abby approached, setting down her medical bag. "I'm Clara Bennett, Dr. Thompson's nurse. I'm here to help." The woman's eyes, glazed with pain, focused briefly. "Baby's wrong," she gasped, not turning right. Abby nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "I need hot water, clean towels, and whiskey if you have it," she instructed Abigail. To Mr. Peters, who hovering anxiously nearby, she said, "Sir, please wait outside. This may take some time." Hours passed as Abby worked to turn the breech baby. Her hands remembered the skills learned from her midwife mother, supplemented by battlefield medicine, where women sometimes gave birth amid cannon fire. She spoke soothingly to Mrs. Peters, encouraging, supporting, manipulating the unborn child with careful pressure. Finally, near midnight, a lusty cry filled the cabin as the infant, a boy, emerged into the world. Abby cleaned the baby, wrapped him in a clean cloth, and placed him in his exhausted mother's arms. "He's perfect," Mrs. Peters whispered, tears tracking down her face. "Thank you." Abby smiled, the first genuine smile since returning to Pinewood Creek. This moment of life triumphing over hardship was why she had become a nurse, why she had survived the war, survived Harrison, survived the mountain to bring healing where she could. As she packed her supplies, Mr. Peters returned, his weathered face transformed by joy at the sight of his son. "We thought we'd lose them both," he said quietly to Abby. "Thompson's been too drunk to be much help lately, and with the spring thaw weeks away." "You have a strong wife and a healthy son," Abby replied. "With proper care, they'll both thrive." Peters reached into his pocket, producing a few coins. "It's not much, but—" Abby shook her head. "No payment necessary. Dr. Thompson's services are covered by the mining company." A small lie, but one she felt justified in telling. "The company don't care if we live or die," Peters said bitterly. "Not since Rodriguez tried to organize us. Now they watch us like hawks, looking for any excuse to turn us out." Abby hesitated, then asked carefully, "Was Rodriguez a friend of yours?" Peters glanced toward the door, lowering his voice. "All of us who came up from Mexico together were close. Rodriguez just had the courage to speak up. Look what it got him." "And his wife, Lucia," Abby tried to keep her tone merely curious. A shadow crossed Peters' face. "Disappeared the night of the big storm. Some say she tried to flee to the high country where the mountain man helps folks in trouble. Others say he trailed off, unwilling to voice darker possibilities." Abby's heart sank. Lucia, who had trusted her with the White Lily's secret, who had never reached haven. Another soul lost to Harrison's cruelty. "If there's nothing else you need, I should return to the clinic," she said, gathering her bag. "Dr. Thompson will check on your wife and son tomorrow." As she prepared to leave, Mrs. Peters called softly, "Nurse Bennett." Abby turned. "Yes." The new mother's eyes held something knowing, something cautious. "The women here, we help each other. If you ever need anything, information, a place to hide, whatever, you come to us. We remember kindness." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Abby nodded, understanding passing between them. "Thank you, I'll remember that." Outside, the night had turned bitterly cold. Abby pulled her shawl tighter, hurrying through the deserted streets toward the clinic. Her mind raced with the implications of Mrs. Peters' offer. Were the mining families part of the Moonlight Road network, or simply allies through shared suffering? So focused was she on these thoughts that she didn't notice the figure emerging from the shadows until a hand grasped her arm. "Well, well, what have we here?" Abby froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that voice, had heard it so often in her nightmares. Vincent Holloway. She kept her head down, praying the dim light, the spectacles, and the wig would conceal her identity. Excuse me, sir. I'm Dr. Thompson's new nurse returning from attending a birth. Vincent's grip tightened. A nurse is a convenient profession for a woman alone. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. What's your name, nurse? Clara Bennett, sir. I've only just arrived in Pinewood Creek. If you'll excuse me, I have patients waiting. She tried to pull away, but Vincent stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. Funny time for Thompson to hire help with half the town talking about his drinking problem. His free hand moved to tilt her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Have we met before, Clara Bennett? You seem familiar. Abby's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Vincent's eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, studied her face with growing suspicion. No, sir, she managed. I've come from Minnesota. This is my first time in Montana territory. A smile spread across Vincent's face, not relief, but the satisfied expression of a predator scenting blood. Minnesota, you say strange. You don't have the accent. Almost sounds like Virginia, perhaps, or Maryland. Virginia, where Abby had been born and raised before the war, before Harrison, before everything. Vincent leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You know, my brother's wife was from Virginia. Lovely woman nurse during the war. Disappeared in a blizzard months ago. His fingers dug painfully into her arm. Harrison's been inconsolable. Imagine his joy if she were found. Terror gripped at Abby's throat, choking off response. Vincent knew. Somehow he knew. Then, like divine intervention, a voice called from down the street. Vincent Holloway, is that you, harassing Thompson's new nurse? Elizabeth Frost approached her cane, tapping a sharp rhythm against the frozen ground. Despite her advanced age, she cut an imposing figure in her morning black spine, straight as a rifle barrel. Vincent released Abby's arm but didn't step back. Mrs. Frost, out rather late, aren't you? The church charity meeting ended hours ago, as did the posse search, I understand. Elizabeth's tone was acid. Yet here you are accosting respectable women instead of reporting to your brother. Vincent's jaw tightened. Harrison knows I have my own methods of investigation. Indeed, methods that apparently include frightening Dr. Thompson's much-needed nurse. Elizabeth turned to Abby. Mrs. Bennett, I presume Helena mentioned you might be arriving. I trust your journey was uneventful. Abby seized the lifeline Elizabeth offered. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for inquiring. Good. Thompson's patients cannot afford further disruption. My grandson requires treatment for his cough, and I expect competent care. She fixed Vincent with a glacial stare. The town council might question why the Walsh Mining Company provides a doctor who requires constant replacement of staff. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Vincent might suspect Abby's identity, but challenging Elizabeth Frost, whose financial interests rivaled the Walsh family's, was another matter entirely. Of course, Mrs. Frost, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I was merely offering Mrs. Bennett an escort back to the clinic. These streets can be dangerous after dark. I'll see to Mrs. Bennett's safety, Elizabeth declared. You have matters to attend to at the mine, I'm sure. For a moment, Vincent hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon his prey. Then, with a slight bow that mocked them both, he retreated into the shadows. Abby released a shuddering breath. Thank you, she whispered once Vincent was out of earshot. Elizabeth's expression remained stern, maintaining their public facade. Come, Mrs. Bennett, I'll walk you to the clinic. We have matters to discuss regarding my grandson's treatment. They proceeded in silence until reaching the clinic's back entrance. Once inside, with doors locked and curtains drawn, Elizabeth's rigid posture relaxed slightly. That was careless, she said with a preamble. Vincent Holloway is dangerous, more so than his brother, in many ways. Harrison's violence is obvious, predictable. Vincent hides his cruelty behind charm and calculation. He recognized me, Abby said, removing the spectacles to rub her eyes. Or suspects, at least. Of course he does. Vincent has always been observant, but suspicion isn't proof, and he'll need proof before approaching Harrison. The humiliation would be too great otherwise. Elizabeth settled into a chair, suddenly looking every year of her age. Still, we must accelerate our plans. Vincent will be watching you now. What plans? I've barely established myself here. The betrayer, Elizabeth reminded her. We need to identify who has been passing information about the Moonlight Road to Harrison and his allies. Someone who knows enough to provide map safe house locations. Abby paced the small room, mind racing. It must be someone with access to multiple parts of the network. Someone trusted. Precisely. Few have such comprehensive knowledge. Myself, Daniel, perhaps three others. Elizabeth's gaze was piercing. One of whom is in this town. Who? Reverend Wright. The name struck Abby like a physical blow. The minister? But he's always seemed so pious. Piety and virtue are not the same thing, my dear. Elizabeth's smile was grim. Wright has been part of the Moonlight Road since its beginning. He provides spiritual comfort to those fleeing, and his church connections offer legitimate means of transportation, missionary groups, charity caravans, and such. But why would he betray the road? What could Harrison possibly offer him? That's what you need to discover. Wright holds confession hours tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you unburden your soul to him. Abby understood the implication approach Wright, as Clara Bennett perhaps hint at knowledge of the Moonlight Road gauge his reaction. And if he is the betrayer, what then? Elizabeth's eyes hardened. Then Daniel and I will handle it. Your task is confirmation only. The cold practicality in the older woman's voice sent a chill through Abby. What did handling it entail? She didn't ask. Some knowledge was better left unacquired. 3 days later, Abby finally visited Reverend Wright for confession. The church stood at Pinewood Creek Center, its white steeple visible from every corner of town, a physical representation of its centrality to community life. Inside the nave was empty during the afternoon confession hours, just as Elizabeth had predicted. Abby slipped into the confessional booth, heart pounding beneath her prim dress. Through the lattice screen, she could make out Wright's profile, a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and a perpetually solemn expression. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. She began deliberately using Catholic phrasing that would immediately signal something amiss in this Protestant church. Wright stiffened. This is not that kind of confessional, Mrs. Bennett. We Presbyterians believe in direct communion with God. Of course, forgive me. Abby lowered her voice further. I'm new to your denomination. In Minnesota, my congregation was different. Minnesota. Wright turned slightly toward the screen. Mrs. Frost mentioned you had come from there, seeking a fresh start after your husband's passing. Yes, though I confess Pinewood Creek is not what I expected. There are whispers about this town, about women who disappear, about a road that leads to freedom. The silence that followed was profound. Abby held her breath, watching for Wright's reaction. His hands clasped before him tightened until the knuckles showed white. Mrs. Bennett, he finally said, voice barely audible. Such talk is dangerous in Pinewood Creek. There are those who would misinterpret innocent concerns. I seek only truth, Reverend, and perhaps a path for others who might need it. Wright abruptly stood. Join me in my study. These matters require privacy. Abby followed the minister through the church to a small office behind the pulpit. Once the door closed, Wright's demeanor changed completely, the pious calm replaced by nervous energy. Who sent you? He demanded. Was it Frost or Daniel? The direct question caught Abby off guard. I don't know what you mean. Please. Wright ran a hand through his silver hair. I've been in Pinewood Creek 20 years. I know when someone is testing me, especially regarding the road. Abby decided on a partial truth. I've heard stories about women escaping abusive situations, about a network that helps them. I thought, given your position, that you might be part of it. Wright's laugh was bitter. I was, once, before I understood the cost. What cost? Wright moved to a window overlooking the church cemetery, his back to Abby. You're new here. You don't understand how things work in Pinewood Creek. The Walsh family, Judge Blackwood, the other pillars of the community, they don't tolerate interference in what they consider private matters. You mean they don't tolerate women escaping their control? Precisely. Wright turned, his expression haunted. 3 years ago, I helped a young woman leave town, Alice Grantham, the pharmacist's daughter. Her father had arranged her marriage to Judge Blackwood, a man 40 years her senior who had already buried 2 wives. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. What happened to her? She made it to California, started a new life. His voice broke slightly. Then last year, Harrison Walsh showed me a letter from Alice to her mother. It contained details, names, locations, routes of the Moonlight Road. Understanding dawned. They found her. Wright nodded. Walsh made it very clear either I provide information about the road's operations, or Alice and her mother would suffer the consequences. A week later, to prove his seriousness, he had Vincent break the pharmacist's fingers. One by one, said it was a robbery gone wrong. So you've been feeding them information, Abby said, horror and pity warring within her, betraying the road to protect Alice. Not willingly. Wright's eyes filled with tears. I've tried to limit what I share to give false leads when possible, but they check my information, and when they find discrepancies, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm mottled with burn scars. Vincent is creative with his punishments. Abby sank into a chair, the implications staggering. Wright wasn't a willing betrayer. He was a man caught in an impossible position trying to minimize harm while under constant threat. Does anyone from the road know about this, about Alice? How could I tell them Daniel would storm into town, confront Harrison directly? People would die. Wright shook his head. I've prayed for guidance, for a way out that doesn't end in bloodshed, but Harrison holds all the power here. A thought occurred to Abby, a dangerous, desperate thought. What if Harrison didn't hold the power anymore? Wright stared at her as if she'd suggested moving the mountain itself. What do you mean? Harrison's authority comes from fear, from the belief that he's untouchable. But what if there was evidence of his crimes? Something that even Judge Blackwood couldn't ignore. Such evidence would never reach the proper authorities. The sheriff, the judge, the territorial representative, all are in Harrison's pocket. Then it goes above them, to the governor, to newspapers in Helena and beyond. Abby leaned forward, an idea taking shape. The mining families keep records, don't they? Of accidents, of men who disappear. Wright nodded slowly. Yes, Rodriguez was creating such a record before they killed him. And you must have knowledge of the women who have vanished. Dates, circumstances. I keep a private journal. Wright's voice strengthened slightly. Names, dates, as much detail as I can gather without raising suspicion. I thought perhaps someday when someone might find it, might seek justice. Why wait? Abby stood, energy coursing through her. Together with the miners' records, your journal could expose everything, the abuses, the disappearances, the entire system Harrison and the others have built. Hope and fear warred on Wright's face. Even if we gathered such evidence, how would it reach the outside world? Harrison watches the mail, the telegraph, the stage lines. The Moonlight Road has its ways, Abby assured him. Routes that bypass Harrison's surveillance. Wright studied her with newfound intensity. Who are you really, Clara Bennett? No ordinary nurse speaks of toppling powerful men as if discussing the weather. Abby hesitated, weighing the risk of truth against the need for Wright's trust. Before she could decide, the church door opened, voices echoing in the nave. Wright gestured for silence, moving to his study door. Reverend, the man called, are you here? I've brought the donation from the Walsh Mining Company for the Orphans Fund. Vincent. The timing couldn't be coincidence. A moment, Mr. Holloway, Wright called, his ministerial voice returning seamlessly. To Abby, he whispered, the side door, quickly. And Mrs. Bennett, be careful, they're watching more closely than you know. Abby slipped out as directed, circling behind the church through the cemetery. Her mind raced with the implications of Wright's revelation. Not a willing betrayer, but a man caught in Harrison's web, forced to compromise to protect others. She needed to get word to Daniel. As dusk gathered, Abby made her way to the hollow oak behind the cemetery. Glancing around to ensure she wasn't observed, she placed a white stone in the tree's cavity, the signal for urgent contact. That night, she barely slept, alternating between planning and listening for any sound that might indicate Vincent had discovered her identity. By morning, exhaustion had left dark circles beneath her eyes, visible, despite the spectacles Clara Bennett always wore. The clinic was unusually busy. A mine accident had left several men with minor injuries, keeping Abby too occupied to dwell on fears or plans. By mid-afternoon, as she was treating the last patient's lacerated hand, Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway, surprisingly sober. Mrs. Bennett, I've just received word from the Walsh residence. Mrs. Frost is taken ill while visiting there. Mr. Walsh has requested you specifically, as I'm needed at the mining camp. Cold dread washed over Abby. Elizabeth Frost ill at Harrison's house. It made no sense. Elizabeth would never willingly enter the lion's den unless a trap. Of course, doctor. I'll go at once. Thompson handed her a medical bag. Take my spare. I've already included the laudanum and morphine Mrs. Frost might require. The bag felt unusually heavy. As Abby took it, something shifted inside, something that clinked metallically unlike any medical instrument. Thank you, doctor. I'll report back once I've assessed Mrs. Frost's condition. Outside, Abby ducked into an alley and opened the bag. Nestled among the expected medical supplies was a revolver loaded and ready. Beneath it lay a note in Daniel's handwriting. Mother never visits Harrison. This is their move. Be ready to make yours. I'll be watching the back garden. D. Sham. Abby's hand closed around the revolver. The weight of it, the cold metal against her palm, brought back memories of the war, of learning to shoot, when the field hospital came under Confederate attack of the young doctor who had insisted all his nurses know how to defend themselves and their patients. She had hoped never to hold such a weapon again, had prayed her war was over, but it seemed Pinewood Creek had other plans. Concealing the gun beneath her shawl, Abby started up the hill toward the Walsh mansion. Each step carried her closer to the home that had been her prison, to the man who had nearly destroyed her, to what might be her final confrontation with Harrison Walsh. The Walsh house stood like a fortress on the highest point of Pinewood Creek, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Abby approached from the front, maintaining Clara Bennett's prim, efficient demeanor despite the terror coiling in her stomach. A maid answered her knock, not Mary, who had witnessed Abby's kindness to Lucia, but a new girl Abby didn't recognize. I'm Nurse Bennett, she explained. Dr. Thompson sent me to attend to Mrs. Frost. The maid nodded, stepping aside. They're in the drawing room, ma'am. They. The word confirmed Abby's suspicions. This was no medical emergency. She followed the familiar hallway, each step echoing against hardwood floors she had once polished to Harrison's exacting standards. The drawing room door stood partially open. Inside, voices murmured, male voices. Abby adjusted her spectacles, ensured her wig was secure, and knocked once before entering. The scene that greeted her might have been a casual social gathering, if not for the tension vibrating in the air. Harrison Walsh sat in his customary armchair by the fireplace, tumbler of whiskey in hand. Vincent lounged against the mantel, smirking slightly. Judge Blackwood occupied the settee, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his eyes cold as January frost. No sign of Elizabeth Frost. Ah, the mysterious Nurse Bennett. Harrison's voice that had once commanded her every moment, washed over Abby like ice water. Thank you for coming so promptly. Abby maintained her disguise, keeping her gaze slightly lowered, her posture modest. I understand Mrs. Frost requires medical attention. Vincent's laugh held no humor. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Elizabeth is in perfect health, attending a church function. I believe I don't understand. Abby clutched her medical bag tighter, feeling the reassuring weight of the revolver within. Dr. Thompson said what he was instructed to say. Harrison interrupted, rising from his chair. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, handsome, in the conventional way that had once fooled her into believing his exterior reflected his character. We needed to speak with you privately, Mrs. Bennett, or should I say, Abigail. The name hung in the air between them, a death sentence pronounced. Abby could have continued the charade, protested ignorance, maintained her fictional identity. But something in Harrison's confident smirk and Vincent's predatory gaze told her the game was already lost. Slowly, deliberately, she removed the spectacles, raised her chin to meet Harrison's eyes directly. Hello, Harrison. His face twisted with triumph and fury. My wayward wife returned from the dead. Did you really think you could hide from me in my own town, that I wouldn't recognize what belongs to me, no matter how you disguised it? I never belonged to you, Abby replied, her voice steadier than she had thought possible. Not in any way that matters. Harrison circled her slowly like a wolf sizing up wounded prey. You embarrassed me, Abigail. Made me the subject of gossip and speculation. Do you know what that cost? The business opportunities lost because men questioned whether I could control my own household. Is that all I was to you, a possession to be controlled? What else would you be? Harrison seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. A wife exists to enhance her husband's position, to provide comfort and heirs. You failed at both. The casual cruelty of his assessment, reducing 6 years of her life to a contractual obligation unfulfilled, should have hurt. Instead, it strengthened Abby's resolve. This man, this monster in gentleman's clothing, had never seen her, had never known the woman who had nursed broken soldiers, who had survived the wilderness, who had found purpose in helping others escape men like him. "Where is she, Abigail?" Harrison demanded, his tone hardening. "Julia? Did she send you back to taunt me?" "Julia is gone," Abby said simply, "beyond your reach." "Liar." Harrison's hand struck her cheek, the familiar pain blossoming across her face. Vincent tracked her to California. She was there planning to testify about the abuses she suffered, to ruin everything we've built. Then she disappeared again. Understanding dawned. Julia hadn't just fled. She had been gathering evidence, building a case against Harrison and his allies. And they had found her before she could act. "Did you kill her too?" Abby asked the question, slipping out before she could stop it. Harrison's expression shifted subtly, not guilt, but something like annoyance at an inconvenient fact. "Julia made her choice, as did Catherine Blackwood before her, as did you when you ran to the mountain man." Judge Blackwood stirred at the mention of his deceased wife. "Enough discussion, Harrison. We need to know what she knows about Frost's operation, about the network." "The Moonlight Road," Vincent supplied, watching Abby's reaction closely. "We know parts of it enough to disrupt several escape attempts. But the central hub has eluded us. Is it Frost's cabin, or somewhere deeper in the mountains?" Abby remained silent, mind racing. They knew about Daniel, about the road, but not about Haven. Not about Elizabeth's involvement. Not about Wright's forced betrayal. Harrison gripped her arm, fingers digging into flesh with bruising force. "Answer him, Abigail. Perhaps I'll be merciful if you cooperate." "As merciful as you were to Lucia Rodriguez," Abby countered, anger overtaking fear. "Or to the miners who dared ask for safer conditions, or to the women who disappear from this town with suspicious regularity." Vincent stepped forward, his expression calculating. "She knows too much, Harrison. Has been asking too many questions around town. The damage is already done." "What damage?" Harrison scoffed. "She's my wife, returned after a period of mental instability. Who would question that narrative once she's properly subdued?" The implication sent ice through Abby's veins. Not death, at least not immediately. Harrison intended to reclaim her, to break her will entirely, to make an example of her for any other woman who might consider escape. Judge Blackwood rose, straightening his waistcoat. "I'll leave this domestic matter to you, Harrison. Just ensure she can't communicate with outsiders. If Frost's network is exposed, it won't—" "Leave that to me," Harrison assured him. "Abigail will be closely monitored. Perhaps a prolonged rest at home is in order. Dr. Thompson can provide suitable medications to calm her nerves." As the men discussed her fate as if she weren't present, Abby's hand slipped into her medical bag, fingers closing around the revolver's grip. One shot, she could end Harrison's tyranny with a single bullet, but Vincent and the judge would remain, would continue the system of oppression that had claimed so many lives. No justice required more than Harrison's death. It required exposure, accountability, the destruction of the entire corrupt network. Wright's journal, the miners' records, evidence that could bring down not just Harrison, but all of Pinewood Creek's powerful men. "I'll cooperate," Abby said, suddenly interrupting their planning. "I'll tell you everything I know about the Moonlight Road, about Frost, about the women who've escaped." Harrison's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why the sudden change of heart?" "Because I'm tired of running, tired of living in fear." Abby allowed her shoulders to slump, portraying defeat. "You've won, Harrison. You always do." Vincent didn't appear convinced. "It's a trick. She's stalling." "Stalling for what?" Abby challenged. "I'm alone here. Daniel is miles away in the mountains. What could I possibly be waiting for?" Harrison studied her arrogance, gradually replacing caution. This was the Harrison she remembered, quick to believe in his own dominance, eager to accept submission from those he considered inferior. "Very wise, Abigail," he said, his tone softening to the patronizing cadence he used when pleased. "I knew you'd eventually see reason. We can put this unfortunate episode behind us, return to our life together." "I need to use the powder room first," Abby said, adding a slight tremor to her voice. "The journey up the hill, I'm not feeling well." Harrison gestured magnanimously. "Of course. Vincent will escort you." "No," Vincent's voice was sharp. "I don't trust her." Harrison's face darkened at this challenge to his authority. "She's hardly in a position to attempt anything foolish, brother. The doors and windows are secured. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he backed down. Harrison turned to Abby, his smile not reaching his eyes. Don't take too long, my dear. We have much to discuss. Abby moved swiftly to the small powder room off the main hallway, closing the door behind her. The small window overlooked the back garden, just as Daniel had promised. But would he be there? With trembling fingers, she unlatched the window and pushed it open, leaning out into the evening air. Daniel, she whispered urgently, are you there? For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a movement near the old oak tree, a figure detaching from the shadows approaching the house with silent grace. Daniel stood below, his face upturned, concern evident even in the dim light. They know, Abby called softly. Harrison, Vincent, and the judge are all here, but they don't know about Haven, about your mother. Can you get out? Daniel's voice carried just enough to reach her, not without being seen. Abby glanced anxiously toward the door. Any moment Harrison might come looking for her. Listen, Wright isn't a willing betrayer. Harrison is holding a girl hostage, Alice Grantham. Wright has a journal documenting all the missing women, and the miners have records of the accidents. We need that evidence. Daniel nodded grimly. Stay alive. I'll handle the rest. Footsteps approached in the hallway. I have to go, Abby whispered desperately. Abby! Daniel's voice stopped her as she began to close the window. Hold on, just a little longer. The naked emotion in his words gave her strength. I will. She closed the window just as the door handle turned. Harrison stood there, impatience written across his features. Time to rejoin us, Abigail. As she followed him back to the drawing room, Abby felt a curious calm settle over her. She might be trapped in the lion's den, but she was no longer alone. Daniel was out there, the truth was out there, and somewhere in this house of lies, justice was gathering like a storm. She just had to survive until it broke. Vincent and Judge Blackwood waited in the drawing room, their conversation cutting off abruptly as Abby entered. Harrison guided her to a chair, a mockery of gentlemanly behavior, before resuming his own seat. Now, my dear, he said, all false solicitude, tell us about this mountain sanctuary. How many women are hiding there? How many traitors to their lawful husbands? Abby chose her words carefully, balancing truth, lies, and misdirection. I only saw a few. Most had already moved on to California or back east. And Frost, Vincent pressed. Where exactly is his cabin located? North of Eagle Cliff, a day's journey by foot. A partial truth, Daniel's main cabin was indeed there, but Haven lay in a completely different direction. Judge Blackwood leaned forward, his silver beard catching the firelight. And what of my wife? Is Catherine among these fugitives? The naked hope in his voice, hope that his wife might still be alive, still reachable, still controllable, disgusted Abby to her core. I never met anyone by that name, she lied smoothly. Harrison studied her face, searching for deception. And what made you return to Pinewood Creek? Early you knew the risk. I ran out of money, Abby improvised. The mountain is harsh in winter. I thought I could hide in plain sight until spring, then move on. How convenient, Vincent commented dryly. And Dr. Thompson just happened to need a nurse. The position was advertised in Helena, Abby countered. Mrs. Frost mentioned it when I inquired at her bank about work. At the mention of Elizabeth Frost, a shadow crossed Harrison's face. Elizabeth has always had a soft spot for strays. She'll need to be dealt with if she's been aiding Frost's little operation. Abby fought to keep her expression neutral, not betraying the surge of fear she felt for Daniel's mother. She merely mentioned the position. She knows nothing of my circumstances. A sudden commotion erupted outside, shouting, then a gunshot. Harrison was on his feet instantly, reaching for the desk drawer where Abby knew he kept a pistol. Judge Blackwood moved to the window. What the devil? Before he could finish, the drawing room door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there breathing heavily, hat askew. Walsh, the church, it's burning. Harrison froze pistol halfway from the drawer. What, how? Don't know, but it's spreading fast. Could take half the town if we don't contain it. Miller's gaze landed on Abby, momentary confusion crossing his features before urgency reasserted itself. We need every man at the bucket line now. Through the open door, Abby could see orange flames reflected on the clouds above town, hear the distant clanging of the fire bell. The church where Wright's journal was hidden, where evidence that could expose Harrison's crimes might be reduced to ash. Or was that the point? Harrison hesitated, clearly torn between securing his recaptured wife and maintaining his public role of all as town leader. Go, Vincent urged. I'll watch her. Can't have people saying you weren't there in the town's moment of need. With a reluctant nod, Harrison tucked the pistol into his waistband and followed the sheriff issuing orders as he went. Vincent closed the door behind them, turning to Abby with a smile that chilled her blood. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Almost as if someone wanted to create a distraction. I don't know what you're talking about, Abby said, though her heart raced with hope. Daniel, it had to be. No, Vincent moved closer, circling her chair like a predator. I think you do. I think you've been playing us from the moment you returned to Pinewood Creek. He stopped directly behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. The question is, why? Abby remained silent, mind working furiously. Vincent was dangerous, more perceptive than Harrison, more calculating. If she could keep him talking, keep him focused on her rather than whatever Daniel might be doing elsewhere in town. It doesn't matter, Vincent continued when she didn't respond. Whatever you and the mountain man are planning, it ends tonight. His hand moved to his jacket, withdrawing a small knife, the same blade he'd used to carve patterns into Rodriguez's flesh before executing him, if the miner's whispers were to be believed. Harrison may want you alive, broken to his will again, but I've always thought you were more trouble than you're worth. Vincent circled back to face her, examining the knife's edge. Clay will be occupied for hours with the fire. Plenty of time for his poor, mentally unstable wife to take her own life in a fit of despair. So tragic, so final. Fear and determination warred within Abby. The medical bag with Daniel's revolver sat just out of reach. Vincent stood between her and the door. The window offered no escape from the third-floor drawing room. She was trapped. You won't get away with it, she said, playing for time. Harrison will know it wasn't suicide. Vincent laughed. Harrison sees what he wants to see. Just as he never noticed my visits to Julia's bed before she fled. Just as he never questioned why Catherine Blackwood always smiled so warmly when we met at church functions. The casual admission of adultery, of betraying his own brother, struck Abby as somehow worse than his threats of violence. This man violated every bond, every trust for his own gratification. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a realist, Vincent corrected, moving closer. I take what I want. Harrison pretends that taking is justified by marriage certificates and social conventions. The judge hides behind legal opinions and closed-door rulings. But the result is the same men like us always win, Abigail. Always. As he raised the knife, a new sound penetrated the chaos, from town hoofbeats approaching the house, then voices in the foyer below. Vincent hesitated, head turning toward the door. That moment of distraction was all Abby needed. She lunged for the medical bag, fingers closing around the revolver's grip. In one fluid motion, she withdrew it, aimed, and fired. The shot echoed in the confined space of the drawing room. Vincent staggered backward, disbelief etched on his features as crimson bloomed across his chest. The knife clattered to the floor. You, he gasped, reaching toward her with bloodied fingers. I survived the war, Abby said steadily, keeping the revolver trained on him as he collapsed to his knees. I survived Harrison. I survived the mountain. Did you really think I wouldn't survive you too? The drawing room door burst open. Daniel stood there, his own weapon drawn. Elizabeth Frost behind him. Their eyes took in the scene, Vincent bleeding on the oriental carpet, Abby standing over him, revolver still raised. Abby, Daniel breathed, relief and concern mingling in his voice. Are you hurt? She shook her head, the revolver finally lowering as exhaustion swept through her. The church, a distraction, controlled, contained. Elizabeth confirmed, stepping into the room with remarkable composure for a woman her age in the midst of chaos. No one will be hurt, but it gave us time to retrieve Wright's journal and the miner's records. You have them? The evidence? Daniel nodded, moving to Abby's side, carefully taking the revolver from her trembling hand. Everything. Wright confessed his forced betrayal to the entire town council when the fire broke out. The miners presented their records of accidents. It's over, Abby. Not quite, came a voice from the doorway. Harrison stood there, face contorted with fury, his own pistol aimed directly at Daniel. Step away from my wife, he commanded. Now. Daniel didn't move. She's not yours anymore, Harrison. She never really was. She's my wife, Harrison roared, his composure finally cracking. Mine, everything I've built, everything I am requires order, requires respect. If a man can't control his own household, then perhaps he shouldn't have one. Elizabeth interrupted, her voice like steel. Your empire is falling, Harrison Walsh. Even now, Governor Howard's representative is reading Wright's journal, reviewing the miners' records. The telegraph lines to Helena are busy with the reports of mass graves discovered in the abandoned North Shaft graves containing women who supposedly died of fever or fled with traveling salesmen. Harrison's face paled, but his pistol remained steady. Lies. Lies. No court will take the word of miners and whores over mine. Not just their word, Aisha Bird, Abby said quietly. Julia's too. Harrison's eyes widened. Julia is dead. No. Daniel's voice held grim satisfaction. She reached San Francisco, changed her name, built a new life, and wrote down everything you did to her. Everything she witnessed in Pinewood Creek. Her testimony arrived by special courier this morning, addressed to the territorial governor, with copies to newspapers in Helena, San Francisco, and Chicago. Impossible, Harrison whispered, but doubt had crept into his voice. I found her, Harrison, Daniel continued. Not Vincent, me. She's been working with the Moonlight Road from the beginning, helping other women escape men like you. Harrison's hand wavered, the pistol drooping slightly as the full implications of his situation penetrated his disbelief. You're lying, all of you. This is some trick. The report of a gun cut off his words, surprise crossing his features as he looked down at the spreading stain on his shirt. Behind him stood Reverend Wright, a small revolver clutched in shaking hands. For Alice, the minister said simply, and for all the others. Harrison crumpled to the floor, the pistol falling from his grasp. His eyes found Abby's in his final moments, confusion rather than malice in their depths. I gave you everything, he whispered. No, Harrison, Abby replied gently. You took everything. There's a difference. His eyes glazed, fixed on something none of them could see. Harrison Walsh, master of Pinewood Creek, was gone. Silence descended on the drawing room, broken only by Vincent's labored breathing as he clutched his wound. Elizabeth moved to Wright, gently taking the revolver from his trembling hands. It's done, she said quietly. The road is safe. Abby turned to Daniel, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had transpired. Without a word, he opened his arms, and she stepped into them, finding solace in his strength and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. What happens now? She asked, voice muffled against his coat. Justice, he replied simply. For Sarah, for Julia, for all of them. Outside the church, fire had been contained, its purpose served. Throughout Pinewood Creek, lamps glowed in windows as townsfolk gathered, sharing news of revelations too shocking to be processed alone. The miners stood watch at the main house, ensuring none of Harrison's allies could flee before the governor's men arrived. And high on the mountain, Haven waited, a sanctuary for those who would still need it, a beginning for those ready to build something new from the ashes of the old. Take me home, Abby whispered, looking up at Daniel, to the lighthouse. His scarred face softened, his eyes reflecting something she had begun to recognize as hope. Always, he promised, for as long as you want. Together they stepped out into the night, leaving behind the house that had been Abby's prison. Above them, stars glittered like sentinels, witnessing their slow walk toward freedom, toward a future where whispers on the mountain would speak not of escape, but of return, of healing, of home. The Moonlight Road had served its purpose. Now perhaps they could build a path that led not away from danger, but towards something worth protecting. 9 months later, Abby stood in the garden of the new schoolhouse that had risen where Haven once existed. The mountain spring still flowed, but now it nourished vegetables and flowers rather than secrets and fear. In her arms, her daughter slept, tiny Grace Abigail Frostborn, as winter surrendered to spring. The child had Abby's golden hair and Daniel's quiet intensity, already observing the world with serious eyes. Daniel approached from the newly built cabin. They shared a letter in his hand. From Elizabeth, he said, handing it to her. The governor has officially pardoned Wright. He'll be returning next month to help with the school. Abby smiled, shifting the baby to read the letter. And Alice? Daniel's expression softened. She's well, coming with him. Elizabeth has arranged for her to teach music here. Abby nodded, a bittersweet feeling washing over her. The girl Wright had been forced to betray the road to protect another innocent, caught in Harrison's web of control. So many lives damaged, so many still healing. Judge Blackwood had been tried and sentenced to 20 years in a territorial prison. Vincent had survived his wound only to face a firing squad for the murders of Rodriguez and 3 other miners whose bodies had been discovered in the abandoned North Shaft. Harrison's empire had crumbled, his assets divided among his victims. The mine now operated as a cooperative, with the workers sharing profits and implementing the safety measures Rodriguez had died demanding. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his arm encircling her waist. "How much has changed? How much remains to be done?" Abby leaned into his embrace, their daughter nestled between them. "The road helped women escape. Now we need to build a world they don't have to flee from." Daniel nodded, his gaze traveling to the schoolhouse where children from the mining families now received the education previously reserved for the town elite. One step at a time, they stood in silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains that had once hidden them and now sheltered their new beginning. The lighthouse cabin remained a reminder of darker days, but also of resilience, of survival against impossible odds. "Do you ever regret it?" Abby asked softly. "Going back, confronting Harrison directly instead of simply running?" Daniel considered this, his scarred face thoughtful in the fading light. "No, running saves lives, I'll never deny that. But sometimes you have to stand and fight for what matters." "And what matters to you, Daniel Frost?" She looked up at him, still marveling at how his stern features softened when they were alone. His answer was simple. "This, you, our daughter, the truth." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the chance to build something lasting from so much loss. As darkness settled over, the mountain lamps were lit in the cabins scattered throughout the new settlement. From the schoolhouse came the sound of singing. Catherine Blackwood had returned from San Francisco, with Emma bringing other survivors of the Moonlight Road with her. Together they were creating something unimaginable, just a year before a community founded on choice, rather than coercion, on respect rather than fear. The mountain road still existed, a network of safe houses and secret passages that would continue to guide women to freedom when needed. But now it had a destination worthy of the journey, not just escape, but true sanctuary. Abby looked down at her sleeping daughter, then up at the man she had come to love through shared purpose and quiet understanding. The shadows of their past would always be there, but they no longer defined the path ahead. "We should go in," Daniel said, noting her shiver as the evening cooled. "It's getting cold." "In a moment," Abby replied, wanting to hold this perfect peace a little longer. "The stars are coming out." Above them, the first stars appeared, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight from Harrison's house, her fall from Eagle Cliff, her return to Pinewood Creek. They had seen her at her weakest, her most afraid. Now they watched as she stood tall, a child in her arms, a future before her. The shadows of the pines stretched long across the mountainside, but Abby no longer feared what darkness might hide. She had walked through the valley of death and emerged not just alive, but truly living. That was the greatest victory of all.